It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. Just me, my girlfriend Jess, and our friends Tyler and Mia. None of us were expert skiers, but the idea of a secluded resort during a snowstorm seemed exciting, even romantic. Jess had found the lodge online, a small, off-the-grid place nestled high in the Rockies. It wasn't a luxury destination, but the photos looked cozy, and the price was too good to pass up. We arrived late Friday evening. The place was exactly as advertised, quaint, with wood paneling, stone fireplaces, and a warm lodge aesthetic. The staff were polite but distant, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. An older man at the front desk gave us a long, lingering look as he handed over the keys. I chalked it up to small-town quirks, but Jess nudged me. "He's kind of creeping me out," she whispered. I laughed it off, trying to keep the mood light, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled in my chest as we settled into our room. By Saturday morning, the storm was in full swing. Wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and piling snow against the door. Tyler, always the adrenaline junkie, suggested we hit the slopes anyway. "We're here, aren't we?" he said, already pulling on his gear. "One run won't kill us." It was a bad choice of words, though we didn't know it at the time. The ski lift was old, with rusted poles and frayed cables. I half joked about it collapsing, but the operator barely cracked a smile. "You'll be fine," he said gruffly, pulling a lever to send us up. "Just stay on the marked trails. And don't stay up there too long." As we ascended, the resort disappeared beneath us, replaced by an endless expanse of white. Snow swirled in the air, and the wind grew stronger, rocking the lift. Jess gripped my arm. About halfway up, the lift jerked violently and stopped. At first, we thought it was a routine pause. But after 5 minutes, then 10, the cold started to seep in. I hit the emergency button, but the intercom crackled uselessly. Jess tried to stay calm, but I could see the panic creeping in. Tyler joked to lighten the mood, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Even Mia, who rarely showed nerves, was biting her lip, her eyes darting around. Then we heard it. A low, guttural howl echoed through the storm. At first, I thought it was the wind, but there was a rhythm to it, something deliberate. "Did you hear that?" Jess whispered. "Probably just the wind," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The sound came again, closer this time. "I don't think that's the wind," Tyler said. The cable above us groaned, and the lift swayed violently. Jess screamed, clutching me tighter. Looking up, I thought I saw something moving along the cable, a dark shape, too large to be a bird. It moved unnaturally fast, disappearing into the snow before I could make sense of it. "There's someone up there," Mia said. I wanted to tell her she was imagining things, but then the cable shook again. This time, it felt intentional, like someone or something was testing its strength. "Whatever's up there, we can't stay here," I said, my breath visible in the frigid air. Tyler didn't need convincing. He unbuckled his seatbelt and jumped, landing with a muffled thud in the snow below. Jess hesitated, but when the lift swung again, she followed. Mia went next, leaving me alone. The storm was worse on the ground. Snow came up to our waists, and the wind made it nearly impossible to see. We stumbled downhill, praying we were heading back toward the lodge. Behind us, the howling started again, louder now. "They're following us," Mia said, her voice breaking. "Don't look back," Tyler said, grabbing her arm and pulling her forward. I couldn't help myself. I turned, and for a brief moment I saw them. Dark figures, hunched and angular, moving through the storm with unnatural speed. Their eyes, if they even had eyes, glowed faintly in the darkness. "We need to move faster." The trees closed in around us, their branches like skeletal fingers. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, but every time I turned, they were gone. Eventually, we saw the lodge's lights through the storm, a beacon in the endless white. Relief surged through me, until the lights flickered and went out. We made it to the door, slamming it shut behind us. The lobby was empty, eerily quiet. The fire had gone out, and the air was colder than it should have been. "Where is everyone?" Jess asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Snowy footprints led from the door and deeper into the lodge. They weren't human. The tracks were too wide, too deep, with claw-like impressions at the tips. We followed them, though every instinct told me not to. The tracks led us to the dining hall, where the staff and remaining guests were huddled together. Their faces were pale, their expressions frozen in fear. "They don't like it when you stay out after dark," one of the staff whispered. "Who?" Tyler asked. The man didn't answer. He just stared at the door. Before we could press him, the howling started again, this time right outside. The front door shook violently, as if something massive was trying to force its way in. The staff scrambled to block it, piling furniture against the entrance. "Stay away from the windows," someone shouted. We backed away, huddling together in the center of the room. The pounding continued, each blow rattling the walls. Suddenly, the window shattered, and something dark and impossibly fast darted inside. Chaos erupted. People screamed and scattered as the creature moved through the room, its claws slashing through wood and flesh alike. Jess grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the back exit. Tyler and Mia were right behind us. We ran blindly through the hallways, the sounds of carnage fading behind us. The storm outside had quieted, but the silence was worse. Finally, we reached our room, locking the door behind us. "What the hell were those things?" Mia whispered, her face pale. "No idea," Tyler said, "but we need to get out of here." The howling began again, this time just outside our window. And then, the lights went out again. As I sat in the suffocating darkness, the eerie ringing growing louder, I realized the silence wasn't just outside, it was inside me now. But before I could act, a faint whisper carried on the cold wind reached my ears. It didn't come from the candle or the bells, it came from the forest. The same forest where, years ago, people vanished without a trace during what the locals still call the Whispering Winter. Because I know it's still out there, waiting. When I first moved to Iverson, I thought the winters were just part of the charm. The town sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forests that seemed to stretch forever. The kind of place where the snow came early, blanketing the streets by late October and sticking around well into March. It was picturesque, sure, but the cold had a way of seeping into your bones. And as I came to find out, into your mind. The first death happened the night after Halloween. Danny Harper, a mechanic everyone knew, was found in his driveway, frozen solid. The official report said he'd gotten drunk and passed out in the snow. Except Danny didn't drink, at least, not since his wife left him years ago. I heard about it at the diner the next morning. Locals whispered theories over their coffee. "Must have been the cold snap," one woman said. "Caught him by surprise," but I could see the doubt in her eyes. No one wanted to admit it, but Danny's face, they said, was twisted like he'd seen something terrible, just before he died. The second death came a week later. Claire Marston, the town librarian, was found in the woods behind her house. She'd gone for a walk, they said, but the way they found her made my stomach turn. Her hands were frozen in front of her, like she'd been trying to claw her way through the snow. They said her face looked the same as Danny's. I tried to stay out of it. I was the new guy in town, and I figured the less I got involved in small-town gossip, the better. But it was hard to ignore the fear spreading through Iverson. People started locking their doors at night, something they'd never done before. Even the kids seemed quieter, their laughter muted as they played in the snow. Then the whispers began. It started with little things. A neighbor swore she heard footsteps outside her window, but when she looked, there was only an unbroken stretch of snow. Another man claimed he saw shadows moving in the woods, but no one was there when he checked. And then there were the voices, soft, almost musical, calling out names in the dead of night. I wouldn't have believed it if it hadn't happened to me. It was late, maybe 2 a.m., when I woke up to the sound of someone saying my name. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but then I heard it again, clearer this time, and coming from outside. I got out of bed and peered through the window. The moon was bright, lighting up the snow-covered yard, but I didn't see anyone. I told myself it was just the wind, but deep down I knew better. The next morning, I found footprints leading away from my house, small and delicate, like a child's. They ended abruptly at the edge of the woods, as if whoever, or whatever, had made them had vanished into thin air. By now, the whole town was on edge. The sheriff organized a search party, but they didn't find anything. No signs of animals, no strangers passing through. Just snow and silence. That's when Old Man Griggs started talking about the Wendigo. Griggs was the town's unofficial historian, always eager to share a story, especially if it was unsettling. He claimed the Wendigo was a spirit that haunted the winter woods, preying on the desperate and the lost. It feeds on fear. The colder it gets, the stronger it becomes. Most people dismissed him, but I noticed they didn't laugh. The third death hit close to home. It was my neighbor, Sarah. She was young, just out of college, and had moved back to Iverson to take care of her grandmother. I'd seen her the night before, shoveling her driveway. She waved at me, her cheeks red from the cold, and I thought about inviting her over for coffee. But I didn't. They found her the next morning, sitting on her porch. She looked like she'd been trying to scream, but her mouth was frozen shut. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, I stayed up late, watching the woods from my living room window. The temperature had dropped again, and the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows. For hours, there was nothing but darkness and snow. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow moving between the trees. But as I squinted, it became clearer. It was tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes, its eyes, glowed faintly like embers in the dark. It didn't move like a person. Its steps were jerky, unnatural, as if it wasn't used to walking. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, swallowed up by the night. I don't remember going to bed. The next morning, I woke up with the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. The air in the room was icy, and my breath fogged in front of me. My bedroom door, which I always kept closed, was slightly ajar. I knew I couldn't stay. By noon, I'd packed up my car and was on the road. As I drove out of Iverson, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the town shrinking in the distance, its snow-covered rooftops looking almost peaceful. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, hidden in the endless white. That was 2 years ago. I've never gone back, and I don't plan to. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, my name, carried on the wind like a secret. And when the first snow falls each year, I make sure my doors are locked, my windows shut tight.
Before the next story, please subscribe.
Christmas Eve in my hometown was usually a bustling, noisy affair. The town square would glow with festive lights. Kids would dart between the stalls sipping hot chocolate, and carolers would sing loud enough to wake the dead. But this year was different. It started with the silence. I stepped out of my house that evening, bundled in a coat, heading to meet my friends by the tree in the square. As soon as I locked the door, I noticed it. No sound. No laughter from the Thompson kids playing in their yard. No hum of Christmas music from the neighbors' stereos. Not even the wind dared to whistle through the trees. I walked down Main Street, the snow crunching under my boots the only sound in the frozen stillness. Lights still twinkled in windows, and the decorations were all in place, but it was like the whole town had paused mid-breath. When I got to the square, it was deserted. The tree stood tall and proud, wrapped in shimmering gold ribbons, but the space around it was empty. I pulled out my phone to text my friends, but the message wouldn't send. No signal. That's when I saw Mr. Carter, the owner of the general store. He was standing by the fountain, staring at the tree. I called out to him, relieved to see another person, but he didn't respond. I moved closer and realized something was very wrong. His face was pale, his lips barely moving as he muttered to himself. "Mr. Carter? Are you okay?" He turned to me slowly, his eyes wide and glassy. "The bells," he whispered. "What bells?" I asked, but he didn't answer. Instead, he raised a trembling hand to point at the church at the edge of town. Its spire loomed against the dark sky, its bells long silenced since the church closed years ago. Before I could ask anything else, he stumbled away, disappearing into the shadows of an alley. By now, I was spooked. I tried calling my parents, but my phone was useless. I decided to head to the church, hoping to find someone who could explain what was happening. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, like something unseen was pressing down on me. The silence grew thicker, and my own breathing sounded unnaturally loud. When I reached the church, the door was ajar, creaking softly as it swayed in the windless night. Inside, the air was colder, and the faint smell of decay made my stomach turn. The pews were covered in a fine layer of dust, undisturbed for years. I was about to leave when I heard it, a faint ringing, so soft I almost missed it. It came from the belfry above. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but curiosity, or maybe something deeper, kept me moving. I climbed the rickety wooden staircase, each step groaning under my weight. When I reached the top, I froze. The bells were there, massive and tarnished, but they weren't moving. The sound was coming from somewhere else. I stepped closer, my breath visible in the freezing air. As I peered over the edge of the belfry, I saw them. Figures in the snow. Dozens of them, standing motionless in a perfect circle around the church. They were dressed in dark cloaks, their faces hidden, but their presence was suffocating. The ringing grew louder, and I realized it wasn't coming from the bells at all. It was coming from them. Suddenly, one of them looked up, and I swear they saw me. Though their face was hidden, I felt the weight of their gaze. Slowly, they began to move, their cloaks dragging through the snow as they approached the church. Panic surged through me. I scrambled down the stairs, nearly falling in my haste. By the time I reached the door, the figures were already inside, their footsteps eerily silent. I ducked behind a pew. The figures glided down the aisle, gathering around the altar. One of them stepped forward, pulling back their hood. It was Mrs. Harding, my old high school teacher. Her skin was gray, her eyes sunken, but there was no mistaking her. She held up a large black book, its pages fluttering as if caught in a breeze only it could feel. The others began to chant, their voices low and guttural, vibrating through the air. The ringing grew deafening, filling my head with an unbearable pressure. And then, everything went dark. I don't know how long I was out, but when I came to, the church was empty. The figures were gone, and the oppressive silence had lifted. I stumbled outside, desperate for fresh air. The town looked normal again. Lights flickered in windows, and I could hear faint sounds of music and laughter in the distance. It was as if nothing had happened. But as I walked back home, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Every house I passed had a single candle burning in the window, the flame unnaturally still. When I reached my house, I found my parents sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. They didn't even blink when I called out to them. On the coffee table was a candle, its flame steady and cold. I blew it out. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the room plunged into darkness, and the faint sound of bells filled the air.